Tonight on The Spotlight, some truths you may not want to believe about people you would not want in your town. Sexually violent predators.
It's not a matter of if they reoffend, it's a matter of when.
After weeks of protest,
we will keep our families safe by whatever means necessary.
We went to McNeil Island, beyond the barbed wire, behind the closed doors, to ask the people in charge, why should anyone trust a sex offender?
Would you feel comfortable if one was in your neighborhood and was opened up? Would you feel like your family's safe with some of the residents from here being released into the community?
I would.
The Spotlight brought to you by Beacon Plumbing.
Hello and welcome to The Spotlight. I'm David Rose, and this is the most infamous 6.5 square miles in Washington State. This is McNeil Island. This is where they house the sexually violent predators, level 3 sex offenders who serve their time in prison. This is not a prison, this is a treatment facility. There have been a lot of questions in recent weeks about the safety of releasing some of the residents here back into the community in homes in places like Tenino and Enumclaw. So how do they know that the residents here are safe to go back into the community? Tonight we're going to dig into that from all angles. Alejandra Guzman joined me as we toured the island to give you an up-close spotlight look at McNeil Island.
The ride over to McNeil Island reinforces just how cut off the Special Commitment Center is from the rest of Puget Sound. The island lies just 3.5 miles offshore from Pierce County, but it's a world away from normal. The residents are all certified sexually violent predators. Their keepers are among the best mental health experts in the country. The only way onto the island is by secure boat. The only way off, if you're a resident, is with a judge's consent. What happens to those residents between arrival and departure is what we've come to find out. Our guide for the first part of our visit is Keith DeVos, the CEO of the Special Commitment Center.
What are your thoughts on kind of how the system is, or maybe where the misconceptions are about what's going on out here and with the less restrictive housing? Because the law is very clear that there has to be a path to release them at some point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Washington was the first in the nation to recognize the need for civil commitment for sex offenders coming out of prison. When they established this program, it was intended to be a treatment program. It was never intended to be a permanent imprisonment environment.
The life of a convicted sexually violent predator has 3 phases of confinement: prison sentence, civil commitment, and LRAs, less restrictive alternatives. Prison is self-explanatory. McNeil Island is phase 2, civil commitment. That's the political and legal term for involuntary psychiatric treatment.
So we're finally here, and this is what I think people think of as more of a secure facility, almost like a prison, even though it's not a prison, right?
Correct. So this is the total confinement facility, and so residents enter through intake here on the far left side. They're assessed, and then they work their way through treatment. Not necessarily all the way over to load management. Sometimes residents can receive support for conditional release even though they're in medium management, but the idea is they would move through treatment and move through the facility on their way out to conditional release.
Less restrictive alternative housing is both a civil right and a reward. Residents can't be punished more than their prison sentence, so if they respond well to treatment, they can move back into the community, sometimes after decades of confinement.
Being conditionally released into the community, again, that is their constitutional right. They have the right to do that. And when they're conditionally released, it's an opportunity for them to take the skills that they have learned here and apply them in an environment where they're closely monitored.
Right now, there are 129 residents on the island and more than 300 staff, primarily made up of psychiatrists, forensic psychologists, rehabilitation counselors, and clinical social workers. Every day, they come to work with one goal in mind: make the residents safer through treatment.
And that message seems to be getting lost somewhere, it feels like, in all the the anger and about somebody being released into their neighborhood. And we can all understand, right?
I think that people are scared, and I understand that. 10 years ago, before I started doing this work, I might have been the guy in the front row upset at me, thinking that I'm releasing people into the community. They're parents. People want to protect their children. There are victims, survivors. that have been traumatized by people similar to these guys, and we understand that. We're all parents, right? We're all moms and dads. We understand how important this work is. Our families share the same space that everyone else's family shares, and the work that we do out here does make the community safer, because when they are released, whether conditionally or unconditionally, they're out there with our families, your family, my children, and so that's why this work is so important.
I have heard word that at some point the state might shut this facility down. Any truth to that at all?
No, that is absolutely not true. There is no effort to shut down McNeil Island.
And where is that coming from then, do you think? Is it because there are fewer people here than there used to be? More have been transitioned out?
Maybe. I know that there was a study that was conducted that was ordered through the last legislative session to do a cost comparison, whether it'd be cheaper to operate on the island or off the island, and what that would look like. But that is the only thing that I'm aware of. There is no effort to empty McNeil Island. There's no way to do that.
6 years after Seattle was founded, McNeil Island was made a prison. Well, it's no longer a place of punishment, but it is still a place of confinement. And to understand the difference, you have to know about the island's own complicated and controversial history as one of only 6 special commitment centers in the country. Here's Spotlight reporter Alejandra Guzman.
In 1987, Earl Schreiner, a convicted sex offender with a 24-year history of killing, sexual assault, and kidnapping, was released from prison despite the fact that he had informed officials he intended to torture children upon his release. Sadly, Schreiner made good on his intentions 2 years later by brutally raping and mutilating a 7-year-old boy in Tacoma.
Earl Schreiner was one of the individuals who committed his last offense, despite the community even taking efforts of their own to try to protect themselves in the community, and it didn't work. As a result of really a community effort to get the legislators to take a look at what was considered a failure of the legal system, criminal justice system, and mental health systems to protect the public.
The Community Protection Act made Washington the first state to have the power to civilly commit sex offenders they deemed most likely to reoffend. Originally housed in Monroe, Washington, offenders were moved in 1998 to the Special Commitment Center on McNeil Island, and they have remained here ever since.
Why is it so important to have a program and an institution like McNeil Island? What would the outcomes be if this process, if this program weren't to be established?
Those individuals, if they were not detained and civilly committed, would have been released back to the communities, most probably with some level of DOC supervision for a period of time, but not consistently across the board with any requirements for treatment.
I'm not sure if you've seen or heard from the folks in Enumclaw or Tenino, but they seem to believe that there's an uptick in releases, that they're happening all of a sudden. Can you address those concerns and clarify if there's in fact an uptick?
Because of the fair share principle, the efforts to equally distribute residents throughout Washington has resulted in some individuals going to counties, and as such, there's a lot more attention.
The fair share principles were designed to ensure that one county would not absorb a disproportionate amount of sex offenders.
But I think the data will show that this is not a sudden outpouring of our residents, that this actually has been going on for some time. It speaks a lot to the quality of our criminal justice interventions and the focus on rehabilitation and shifting the parameter from punishment, containment to safety precautions balanced with rehabilitation.
Coming up, we asked 3 female staff members how safe they feel walking the hallways with some of the most dangerous men in Washington, and what it takes to actually rehabilitate a sexually violent predator. Between the chief forensic psychologist and the head of clinical services, 5 out of 7 of the highest-ranking staff members at McNeil Island are women. And of the 129 residents they treat, all of them are men, many who once preyed upon women just like them. We asked 3 of those staff members what it's like to work at the Special Commitment Center, and do they feel safe?
I think there's quite a bit of situational awareness going into working with a resident population, such as the individuals that are here and civilly committed. I think what helps quite a big deal is the fact that there's policies, procedures, and training.
Knowing that not all, but many of the residents here have committed crimes against women, this is a place for them to learn to engage in appropriate interactions with women, and seeing women who can have positions of authority or who can be their treatment provider or who can teach them through Pierce College actually helps them learn to have more appropriate engagement with women. So I think it's important that we have females who are willing to work here and that we keep it a safe environment for them to work here, because that's just another thing for the residents to practice in this setting before they release somewhere else.
I actually haven't thought about the fact that I'm a woman in this job. I don't see me being a female as any different than, I see a job that has to get done, and this is public service. We take it very seriously. It's heartfelt work. It's very hard work, but I am just happy to be afforded an opportunity to contribute in this manner.
If you take away the security guards, the hourly checks, and the barbed wire, McNeil Island seems like a typical wellness treatment center where they teach people how to live healthy and fulfilling lives. But the question is, can sex offenders be cured? To find out, Alejandra Guzman interviewed Dr. Megan Reese.
On McNeil Island, there are fences and then there are walls, mental and emotional walls that will keep residents here indefinitely, as effectively as any barbed wire. Breaking down those walls and building healthier, better foundations is work of Dr. Megan Reese.
When we asked about treatment programs here, we were given a lot of buzzwords like trauma-informed, person-centered, and strengths-based approach. What does any of that really mean?
Let's focus on the progress you are making, what things we can do, what protective factors we can build into your life that make it less likely that you would offend in the future.
And Dr. Reese says one of the first crucial steps is freedom, starting with the freedom to choose treatment. It's not forced on them.
Treatment will not work if the residents don't feel safe to participate, to walk around, to go up to our treatment building to come to treatment, and staff have to feel safe while they're here as well, even though they're working with people who have a trauma history, may have some trauma responses, or may hear some things that to themselves may be triggering.
DSHS says 80% of McNeil Island residents enter treatment, but therapy and counseling are not a one-size-fits-all proposition.
Our treatment is adapted to the individuals that we treat. So not everyone gets the exact same groups or the exact same experience in group. So that's what makes it person-centered. We're focusing on the individual and the behaviors that they had engaged in that made them come here.
How can you be sure residents are being honest and not just saying what you want to hear to get off the island?
We can't know that everything that people tell us are honest, but that's part of this teamwork here is what they come into group and say for 4 hours. We still have residential staff and security staff and milieu staff who can see if that coincides with what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Is feeling guilty part of their treatment?
Well, guilt and shame are two different things. So the research shows that shame can be difficult to help people progress through treatment. We do not focus on trying to teach guilt as something you must feel guilty. We focus on what was going on in your life at your time that led you here, and how can you prevent that from happening again. For some people, guilt may be part of that.
But they will be marked as a sexually violent predator for life, on registries wherever they end up living, on job applications that ask if they have committed a crime. Dr. Reese would be okay if we dropped the term entirely when talking about rehabilitation.
Though it's a legal term, it does have some implications that make it more difficult for our residents to transition back and become contributing members of society, because that's just another thing in their way of getting that job, getting that apartment, getting those things can make me be more productive in the community that I release to.
The label also limits the social contacts a resident might call on for support or a safety net.
You hear stories of people I can't keep in touch with my family because that label's on the mail and I don't want to send out mail to them. They don't want their neighbors to know that they know someone who's in the sexually violent predator program.
But little by little, the staff strives to surround residents with ways up if they want a way out.
This may be the first healthy relationship some of our residents have got to experience.
Dr. Reese says self-confidence and self-reliance is improved as they shift focus to the residents' strengths, preparing and planning for the potential risks they might encounter in life outside the barbed wire.
How can I try to start to practice those with the limitations I have here? And then before they leave, we try to get them both to come up with a relapse prevention plan to address any potential risk.
Another obstacle, it may have been decades since a resident has had to take care of themselves, buy food, or navigate around town. So DSHS built a solution, model homes, modeling life in a less restrictive alternative housing.
Another one of their mindfulness rooms.
McNeil Island CEO Keith DeVos showed our crew around.
We're trying to replicate as much of the environment that they're eventually going to release into as we possibly can.
Right now, 9 men currently live here. As a community, they come up with house rules and creating their own living environment.
It's a pro-social environment. Cleaning up after yourself, being aware of other people's space and property and respecting people.
The Pierce County Secure Community Transition Facility is state-owned and operated. There are still many restrictions, but residents are allowed to go off-site for work, grocery shopping, and continued treatment.
They're working towards that unconditional release. And so these are opportunities for them to continue to demonstrate that they have benefited from treatment, that they are safer.
The work is hard and treatment can last years. But speaking with Dr. Reese, we're reminded that this isn't the special confinement center. It's the special commitment center.
I'm proud of everyone who is willing in my department. Like, they come in here, they work hard each day, they hear hard things sometimes, but they treat the residents with respect, and in turn, they're treated with respect.
For the Spotlight, I'm Alejandra Guzman.
Still to come, finding a church and setting up a cell phone. Why it's the little things that count when a sex offender leaves McNeil Island.
The most controversial part of the treatment program here at the Special Commitment Center is when it ends, the process of moving a resident to less restrictive alternative housing.
Setting up a cell phone these days with all its choices and hassles is something Candace Yee thinks about a lot, because many of the residents of McNeil Island don't have a clue.
Modern times, things move pretty quickly. If you look at cell phones even, right? It's upgraded every so often, and things that we probably take for granted, they're not accustomed to at all.
Just as important to Yee are the intangibles.
Are we looking at their spiritual needs? Are we looking at medical needs? Are we looking at setting them up with the services necessary so that they are provided an opportunity to at least have a chance at some normalcy and success in the community?
That's a lot of worry on behalf of people who've committed awful crimes. But Yee says it's keeping the rest of us safe.
The services that we provide, the transition planning itself, and the layer of oversight that goes into somebody hopefully integrating into the community affords the community a layer of protection. So it is important work.
Who are the people who help set the standards for moving residents into the community in the first place? The 13-member Washington Sex Offender Policy Board. They are law enforcers, defense attorneys, victim advocates, and treatment specialists, like psychologist Michael O'Connell, who understands why people are suspicious of the whole process.
Thinking that people who are adjudged sexually violent predators are higher risk, that's a perfectly reasonable place to start. Nothing about that is irrational.
But O'Connell stresses that sex offenders don't get off McNeil Island without years of intense treatment they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mental health issues that fed into it have been addressed in some ways attenuated, but most importantly, there's a reason to believe that the risk has been reduced. And our shared, unmovable shared interest is community safety, and nobody benefits if people get hurt, and nobody benefits if systems don't work.
When we come back, the question we saved for last: how do these professionals really feel about McNeil Island?
For the people who work here, this is not a job, this is a calling.
I mean, I'm proud that we work with a very challenging population and we help to keep the community safe. And not a lot of people get to say, like, on a day-to-day basis, what they're doing is contributing to their community being better and somebody's life being better. So we get to help the individual here and the community at large. So proud of that?
I'm proud of the work I do, and I believe it extends beyond the particular population. It speaks to our leadership, speaks to working with Behavioral Health Administration. I'm proud of the work that the staff do when we're all working together for the betterment of the residents' treatment while keeping people safe is what we thrive on.
I truly feel that we are here making a difference in establishing safety for the community at large, and the work we do here absolutely makes a difference, and for that I'm quite proud.
Finally tonight, as we get ready to pull away from the dock here at McNeil Island to head back to Steilacoom, I want to get some final thoughts from Alejandra Guzman. Alejandra, my impression is that people don't really understand until they saw this broadcast how much treatment, how much effort goes into trying to make sure that these sex offenders are safe when they are released back into less restrictive alternative housing. What stood out to you today from the interviews that you did about what's going on here at McNeil Island?
I can tell you that from each of the individuals we spoke with today, the majority of them women say they feel safe, that they're proud of the work that they're doing here. You heard from them that this is an ongoing mission. This is a calling that they have to ensure that these residents, once they step off McNeil Island and are finding themselves in Tenino, in Enumclaw, that they're safe for the community. That's their mission, to ensure that every single community in Washington is safe.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated issue, and we're grateful to the staff here and to the management at McNeil Island for letting us give you an up-close look at the Special Commitment Center. That's going to do it for this edition of The Spotlight. Until next week, be smart and stay safe.